Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this show. It is Tuesday, June 24th, and we are talking about players 7 through 12 in the consensus PPR rankings. That would be Malik Nabers at 7, Puka Nacua 8, number 9 is Achane, number 10, Ashton Jeanty, Nico Collins 11, and Amon-Ra St. 12. A little bit different than what we told you yesterday because the rankings have changed. So Christian McCaffrey was 12th. He's now 13th. Nico Collins has moved up to 11th from 13th, I believe. So again, it is Nabers, Puka, Achane, Jeanty, Nico, Amon-Ra St. All right.
Wait, what? So tomorrow's show is what?
Will be 13 through 18.
13 through 18?
Mm-hmm.
And then 19 through 24 is Thursday?
Very good, Jamie.
I just want, are you going to show 13 through 24 tomorrow?
No.
Just 13 through 18?
Yeah.
I was going to really screw my rankings up just to have fun on Thursday. Since I
was curious, yesterday was June 23rd, right? And Dave, you moved Nico Collins up, and I'm sure this happens more than I realize, where you guys are just making a slight ranking. Hey, what inspires that in the middle of June?
Research, thinking about obviously what the players can do, what their upside is. And then, like in the case of Nico, I don't even know if I'm going to keep him where I keep him, because I do think that Achane has more upside than Nico Collins, but I believe that there's only 7 receivers on the top tier. Nico is in that top 7. And the way that I think about it is, okay, if I'm picking 11th, these 6 other receivers are gone. Look at all these running backs that are left. I know I'll get one of these running backs in round 2. I don't want to lose my chance on getting one of the top 7 receivers. I'll take Nico Collins. Those are the types of things. It's kind of like, the decisions that you make with taking Chase or Bijan. I mentioned that yesterday. What you might want to do in round 2 could be the tiebreaker between those 2 studs in round 1. These are the types of things that I think about in June, and hopefully lock in so I don't have to bother with it again in August.
I do it when I do drafts. So if I come upon a decision that I'm like, I don't really love this if I'm following my rankings. So I had such a great best ball draft last night. I'll go through a draft and I'll be like, this doesn't feel right, doesn't look right. If I'm doing this myself, why would I encourage other people to do it? So it's typically when I'm doing those type of exercises, I'll change my rankings when it's nothing tangible or actionable has happened.
Do you want to hear how big of a nerd I am, Adam?
Yeah, I already know it, but sure.
Sometimes I like to do mock drafts by myself, and I pick every position, and that helps me set my top 200.
Okay, that's good.
Some people like to go out and see concerts or movies, watch TV shows, coach Little League. I'm alone in my kitchen in my robe and underwear doing one-person mock drafts on a Saturday. Thank you.
And I always felt like I could do 100 mock drafts. We don't do that many, but it feels like it. The second I start doing a real draft, my feet are to the fire and I have to make a pick that's actually going to impact a fantasy team. That's when I get more clarity about who I like better. It's so easy to be, whatever, I'll take Drake London here. But then when I actually, in a mock draft, it's actually a real team, I get this moment of clarity, go, oh, wow, actually, I like this guy better. So I'm sure once the real drafts start.
That's when we'll see how you really love Christian McCaffrey.
Well, someone said to me, because I put my top 6 on Twitter yesterday, it was so much different, fairly different than yours. Chase, Bijan, McCaffrey, Puka, Lamb, Jefferson. And
Tyreek's not in your top 6?
No, he's 7th. No. Someone said to me, you're treating McCaffrey like he's healthy. Why not just make him number 1? That's actually a pretty good point, but I don't think I'd do that. But maybe 2. Chase is definitely going to be number 1 for me, but I could see McCaffrey 2 for me. And honestly, I can see McCaffrey 2 for everyone by the time it's all said and done. More and more glowing reports about Christian McCaffrey and his health. We'll see how high he goes, how high he rises, but he'll rise. I'm confident. Dave, Saquon Barkley, you have a good Saquon Barkley stat. Let's hear it.
So this was something I wanted to get around to doing, and just yesterday and today I had the time to do it. So I thought I would. We know, and we talk a lot about, well, Saquon had, a ton of touches last year. It was like 480 something touches. I should know the number. So I wanted to go back and look Over the last 15 years, Saquon is actually the 17th running back to get at least 400 touches in a season. Of the prior 16 with 400 or more touches, only 3 of them outperformed their 400 touch year. Only 4 more were close enough to their 400 touch year. The other 9 running backs, they all fell short. They either sat out, which is Le'Veon Bell when he held out of his contract because he's a knucklehead, got hurt, and that includes Christian McCaffrey in 2020. Derrick Henry played half a year in 2021, or saw at least a 20% drop in their per game average. 3 of those running backs, by the way, saw a 40% drop. So roughly a little less than half of the running backs were at least decent compared to how they did in their 400 touch year. While I did that research, one of the running backs that kept playing well year after year, I mean, not for a long time, let's call it 3 years, was Ray Rice. He had like 3 years of 400 plus touches. He was doing great. I went and looked at his catches. He had at least 65 catches in each year, had under 350 carries in each of those years. And I'm including the postseason and all of this data. So I thought I'd go back and look at 400 or more carries because that's certainly something that's a little bit more impactful. Saquon Barkley didn't really catch the ball very much last year, much more of a carry guy. He had a ton of carries. I want to say it was around 430. And I went deeper. I went over the last 35 years. How many running backs over the last 35 years have had at least 400 carries in a season? The answer is 25. That includes Saquon. Of the prior 24 running backs with 400 or more carries, only 3 of those guys outperformed their 400 touch year. That includes players who got hurt, and 4 more were close enough to their 400 plus carry year in PPR average where you would say, okay, they weren't as good, but they were like 85% of themselves. So not that many running backs by comparison to 400 plus touches. The other 17 running backs who fell short the year after they had 400 plus carries either got hurt, and that includes Jamal Lewis, who missed an entire season, or they saw at least a 25% drop in their PPR per game average. That takes Saquon completely out of the RB1 conversation for me. And it should be that way for you because if you're drafting him as your top RB, you're expecting him to get in the neighborhood of 20 PPR points. He just had a year where he had 22 and change. If he's going to fall off by 25%, that's 4 points off. Doesn't mean he's not a first round pick, but I would wait to take Saquon Barkley. I would not make him my first. I'm not even going to make him my second running back. I'm going to take a step back from this 28-year-old who had a monster year and is coming off such a huge workload. The odds are, based on the track record of running backs who have done what he did, the odds are against him being anywhere close to as good as he was in 2024.
Okay, so the big headline here, since 1990, 24 running backs before Saquon Barkley had hit 400 or more carries in a season, including the playoffs. Of those 24, 17 of them saw their fantasy points per game drop by 25% or more the next season.
Or they were just out for the year. Like Jamal
Lewis
got hurt in the preseason, didn't play in a single game.
Okay. That is a huge stat. That is a great stat. Well done, sir. Great research. And take from that what you will. All right. FFT Dynasty, Tuesdays and Fridays. You can see that in its own feed, the Fantasy Football Today Dynasty feed, or the episodes do drop in the FFT feed. I don't think it's going to be that way during the season, but it is for now. I'm not sure how much longer that will be going, but feel free to give a subscribe to that podcast. We have some news and notes. James Boyd of The Athletic thinks that Daniel Jones has a significant lead in the Colts quarterback competition. Obviously, you have the shoulder injury for Richardson, but Richardson said he will be good to go for training camp. Russell Wilson said he chose the Giants because of Malik Nabers. That's cool. Can't wait to have the Nabers versus Puka discussion in a moment. Andrew DeChico of InsideTheBirds.com, and this is just more about Saquon Barkley, suggests there will be more variance in the Eagles offense this year. They were so run heavy. I think it's a given that there's going to be more variance in the Eagles offense this year. Zach Kiefer of The Athletic expects the Chiefs to be to try to be more explosive offensively. They were 27th in big plays last year. By True Media, that's defined as a play of 20 or more yards, 27th, and they were 27th in pass plays of 20 or more yards last year. That's the Chiefs. All right, 7 through 12 in the consensus rankings. 7 and 8 are wide receivers. 9 and 10 are running backs. 11 and 12 are wide receivers. 7 and 8 are Malik Nabers and Puka Nacua. And there was a pretty good little debate amongst the YouTube audience in our comments yesterday, because we did talk about Nabers versus Nacua. Just feel like there was a little bit of a lean toward Nabers. I don't have the Twitter poll or the YouTube poll from yesterday, but I currently have a Twitter poll going right now. Who do you prefer in PPR, Nabers or Nacua? 214 votes at the moment, and it's 56% for Nacua, 44% for Nabers. Looking at the consensus rankings, and it's the same for you guys in your individual rankings. You both have Nabers 7 and Nacua 8. Heath has Nacua 9 and Nabers 11, actually. So he likes Nacua better than Nabers, but he's lower on both of them than consensus. Okay, you guys go ahead. Obviously, it's close, so I don't want to make you argue vociferously here about Nabers over Nacua, but why Nabers one spot ahead, Dave?
I think he's got the upside to be the wide receiver 1 in the National Football League, and that's based on talent. There aren't many guys that can accelerate like him, and on top of that, he's just an amazing wide receiver. We were all witness to that last year. I think Daboll deserves a little bit of credit for getting what he did out of Nabers as a rookie with crap at quarterback. And so the play calling, the play designs, the scheme, I don't think that that's a negative whatsoever against Malik Nabers. And the opportunity was huge for him last year. 11.3 targets per game. That was the best, I believe, among everybody in the universe. So having a huge target share, being really good at football, really explosive, really tough to defend, and working in an offense that has a semblance of an upgrade at quarterback certainly makes me feel like Nabers has the highest upside of these running backs. But his floor isn't bad either, because last year he averaged over 18 PPR points per game. He had a couple of stinkers in there. And so I still believe that he's got the opportunity to put up huge numbers. I want to have a player like that on my team. And
Jamie, your argument for Nabers over Nacua?
I think they're both awesome. Going back to yesterday, you have the opportunity to, I think sort of positive and negative pros and cons for both of these guys, and, make your own decision on, Nacua's, you said it, Nacua, his rookie year was better than Nabers' rookie year. And, he took a step forward in his second year as well, in terms of points per game. So will Nabers do the same thing? I think the bottom line is, which situation got better for each player? And it's hard to say that Nabers' situation didn't get better. The situation for Nabers didn't get better and the situation for Nacua got slightly worse. So, they're both top 8, top 10 players. However you look at it, they should both be first round picks no matter what. And you're hoping that they continue the trajectory that they're on. Now, again, can Nacua improve his numbers in year 3? I think if he stays healthy, and you look at what he did without Cooper Kupp producing down the stretch, and hope that Davante Adams is not that same level of production that he was last year and commands more targets than Nacua, because Adams has clearly been the target leader more times than not throughout his career. For Nabers, it's I think Heath has sort of been hammering this home, which is hard to argue against. The quarterback room is dramatically better for the Giants, dramatically better. Whether you like Russell Wilson or not, Wilson, Dart, Winston is so much better than Jones, Boyle, DeVito, Locke. It's not even close. And so if those guys can just continue to help him, forget about what they do for themselves. Nobody's looking at Russell Wilson and Dart and Winston as, maybe Winston, but as league winners for fantasy managers, or helping the Giants become Super Bowl contenders. We're hoping that they're going to make Malik Nabers the star that he's started to show that he can be.
Oh, yeah. All right. I'm going to give some numbers on Nacua and make the case there, just for devil's advocate. After this quick break, update on the Twitter poll. 57% Nacua, 43% Nabers. All right. We'll be right back to continue this discussion on FFD.
Here we go. The 2025 CBS Sports NFL schedule is here. 18 glorious Sundays.
He's got his receiver touchdown.
Filled with rematches.
Oh, the play of the year.
And rivalries.
Touchdown, Bengals.
Plus, plenty of superstar showdowns. And an epic matchup between the Chiefs and Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Clear your Sundays beginning September 7th for the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus.
And by the way, I looked up the word vociferous during that segment just to make sure I had used it correctly. I was a little nervous there, and I did use it. Thank you. Thank you. It was a big word for me. It was kind of a big moment. Thank you. Okay, anyway, Puka Nacua, I just want to throw this.
Look straight ahead into the camera and spell it.
VOCIFEROUS.
You look down. Nope, done.
Okay. I just, we love Malik Nabers. He was number one in the ESPN open metric and their advanced analytics. So he got open better than anyone in the NFL. We think he's a superstar, could be in the discussion as the best wide receiver in the NFL just based on talent, right? I don't think people necessarily feel that way about Puka Nacua, but I'm going to just say Puka Nacua might be better than Malik Nabers, which is crazy because I think Malik Nabers is unbelievable. Puka Nacua does it in a different style, but I said it yesterday, I think twice, so I'll say it now again. Second highest yards per out run rate in the last 12 years for Puka Nacua last season. Now, the only guy who had a better season in the last 12 years was Tyreek Hill. If you compare their rookie numbers, it's not even close. Jamie alluded to that. Puka Nacua had an unbelievable rookie season, one of the best we've ever seen. He was better than Nabers, and he did that with Cooper Kupp. Now, in the 12 games he played with Kupp, 12 or 13, he was wide receiver 12 per game as a rookie in 2023. This past year, he usurped Cooper Kupp. But I think what I would say is that even though he's not a flashy receiver, Puka Nacua might be in that argument to be the best receiver in football. He averages over 6 yards after the catch per reception in both of his seasons. That blows away what Malik Nabers did last year. His explosive play rate, you don't think of him as an explosive player. His explosive play rate was terrific. So that's the thing. If you're going, well, Nabers is so much more talented, I would pump the brakes on that. And also, I think the Rams offense, their passing offense could be even better. They threw for 4,096 yards and 22 touchdowns last year. So while we do project a ton of improvement for the Giants, who threw for 3,521 yards and the fewest touchdowns in the NFL last year, 15, I think the Rams have some ability to improve on that too. Why can't they throw 30 touchdowns this year? It's very possible with Stafford. So I'm going to tell you the one thing that concerns me with Puka, and it's that the Rams, the split for Matthew Stafford last year in wins and losses, I don't know if I have this in my notes, but the pass attempts, they were dramatically different. They became so run heavy late in the year, and they won, and they just kept on winning. I think he threw more than 32 passes in one of his last 7 games, and that was the only game they lost in that stretch. It was a game against the Eagles. When they won, he was throwing probably fewer than 30 times a game. They were very, very run heavy. Crazy splits in wins and losses last year for the Rams. They have this young defense that is loaded with talent, right? They could have one of the better defenses in the NFL this year. So that concerns me with Puka. If they are just league average or top 20 in pass attempts, I'm confident he'll be better than Nabers. No, somewhat confident. Obviously, they're very close. But I was going to bring that up, that he is incredible. Go ahead, Jamie.
Does that concern you with Puka because of Adams now being there? Because obviously Puka was still putting up good stats while they weren't throwing as much last year.
No, I mean, not really. I think that Cooper Kupp had a very underrated season until the last 3 weeks.
I mean, again, we could just reference those last 3 games because, again, Puka's numbers were still very good and they were winning.
Yeah, and Kupp had
I'm just trying to get an idea of your correlation of the lack of throwing to how it impacts Puka.
I mean, if they go into being like the Packers and the Eagles last year, where they are one of the most run-heavy teams, then Puka's probably going to be disappointing because Adams is there. But if that's
what I'm getting at. Is it because of Adams being there on top of it?
I think Adams is a slight upgrade over what Kupp did last year. Kupp was a lot better than people realize. But no, it's more just I don't want to see them become one of the most run-heavy teams in football, which they were down the stretch last year.
Right, but even still doing that, Puka's numbers were good. I think the one thing that benefits him and even Adams, and it was the same thing with Kupp, is like the targets are so concentrated. And so, do they potentially, both these guys, lose a little bit if, and it's a big if McVay sticks to what he said, and he's usually a pretty honest coach, because at the owners' meetings, they had just signed Tutu Atwell to this somewhat ridiculous deal, $10 million deal for 1 year. And he said, I didn't do a good enough job of giving him more opportunities. So does he get the Demarcus Robinson numbers? Does he get maybe a little bit more? And again, I don't think it's going to happen, but you never know. Do they incorporate Tyler Higbee, who was coming back from the ACL tear and had a strong finish into the playoffs? And maybe it's the Higbee-Ferguson combination of the tight ends getting a little bit more. And then in terms of Puka, like you mentioned it, is Devontae Adams on the same level of what Cooper Kupp did early in the season when he was producing at that level? Still Cooper Kupp? Or is he better than Cooper Kupp? And again, age, he really hasn't shown that he's declining tremendously in terms of the way that he does get his production, fantasy and reality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are all things that could be working against Nacua. But I think, again, like, I don't think this is a Nabers Nacua argument, because, again, that's sort of depending on, I think, who you prefer. I think it's just a Nacua argument. Like, I don't think there's reason to doubt him because of what Stafford has shown in relying on him. And then it goes back to, we talked about this on Express yesterday in regards to like Justin Jefferson. Like, McVay finds so many ways to get these guys open, to your point about what he does with hands, and it's just so fantastic. Like, I think if you're tying it back to Nabers, like offense and quarterback, if you are flipping a coin between these guys, those things are not close in favor of what Nacua has.
Yeah. And also Puka Nacua, let's see, in 2 years, where did he finish per game? He's been like top 6 per game, I think, at wide receiver both years. And he has 9 touchdowns in his career.
Yeah.
Right?
Receiving touchdowns.
Yeah,
right. Touchdown last year.
He did have a rushing touchdown. But imagine if he starts getting more end zone. Imagine if he starts catching touchdowns. He gets 8 this year. It could be huge for him.
Right. That's one of the drawbacks to Nacua, is that he's never been a real red zone threat for LA.
Let me give you another Nabers argument, Dave. See what you think about this.
Okay,
Nabers. He scored 23 or more fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games that he played with maybe the most important player on offense for the Giants, Andrew Thomas, their left tackle. Thomas only played 6 games last year, only 4 with Nabers. Meanwhile, the Rams, they might lose their left tackle for the season, unfortunately, with Alaric Jackson having blood clots. So Andrew Thomas is just a massive piece of the offense for the Giants. And in theory, you'll have more Thomas games for Nabers this year.
I'm not gonna make that a tiebreaker between the two. That's just too far down the rabbit hole. Listen, I appreciate a good offensive line, and I agree that an offensive line is very important to how real football works. That's obvious. But I'm not going to say, well, the reason I'm going to take Nacua over Nabers is because of the offensive line issues and what might happen if one of the offensive linemen get hurt. I think that's too far down the rabbit hole. You look at the players' opportunities. You look at who they're catching footballs from. Jamie's right. Russell Wilson, by nearly every single metric, was better than the slop that the Giants had at quarterback last year. And he also takes chances downfield. That's going to help the ADOT, the receiving average for Malik Nabers. I think Nabers' end zone targets go up. He didn't even average the most red zone targets per game last year in New York. Wan'Dale Robinson did. What the hell's that?
140 targets for Wan'Dale.
I'm talking about just in the red zone.
I know, but isn't that crazy? Because that's
a little nuts. So I think that we're gonna see more of an uptick and ascension for Nabers than we will for Nacua, provided that everybody stays healthy in LA. If Devontae Adams is pushed off the age cliff, then we know that Puka's going to see more than 9 targets per game. That'll make him better than Malik Nabers.
All right, let's go to our next group here. So it's 9 and 10, pardon me, in the consensus rankings. It's Devon Achane, and Ashton Jeanty. So we can compare these two guys. But first, Jamie, is there anything that makes you put the Nabers and Nacua ahead of these two running backs, Achane or Jeanty, or do you think they're more or less interchangeable, dealer's choice kind of deal?
In terms of who you take first?
In terms of Nabers, Nacua, Achane, Jeanty, does it matter? Are you adamant that the wide receivers should go ahead of those two running backs?
I am. I don't have Achane as a first-round pick, so yes, I would definitely take the receivers over Achane. He's 13th for me, so just outside of it. But again, Dave touched on this. Like, I think when you start to get to the back end of round one, and certainly depending on where you're picking in the beginning part of round one, like you're seeing there's a much more robust group of running backs that should be available to you comparatively to the wide receivers. And so it's going to come down to format. It's going to come down to how you like to draft, how you like to build your team, what you think could be available to you in the 3-4 range, especially if you're picking in this part of the first round. For me, I'm going to take the receiver. So Nabers, Nacua, Collins, and St. Brown should, in my opinion, go ahead of these guys.
Dave, how do you feel about that?
I agree. And a lot of it has to do with supply and demand at the elite tier of wide receiver and getting in on that. Achane last year, 17.6 PPR points per game. Really good for his second season. Actually, it's not. He was 17.3 as a rookie. So year over year, about the same guy, but obviously he was better when Tua was playing. We going to buy into Achane getting more work and the offense not changing in Miami when they really didn't do anything with their offensive line to suggest, okay, we've fortified it. Like you saw the Bears fortify their offensive line. Okay, they knew they had a weakness there, and they're going to do what they can to better protect their quarterback. Dolphins didn't really do the same thing. And so does that mean that they're content with Tua just getting the ball out as fast as possible? Is he going to play hot potato with the football? And if he does, then that's obviously going to be good for Achane in full PPR because he's going to get a lot of those little dink and dunk targets that he can go and make a play with. When Tua wasn't in there, he didn't even average 10 PPR points per game. That's over a 6-game span. And I can't count on Tua for 17 games. I know we did 2 years ago. I'm nervous about it. I'm also nervous about that offense changing a little bit and trying to push the ball downfield. Why can't they get screens to Waddle and Tyreek, especially if Tyreek's wrist is healthy now? So I think there's a little bit of risk with Achane. There's obviously upside too. But I'd rather have one of those wide receivers that you can almost pencil in a floor of. Do you pencil in a floor of what they did last year? That was 18 PPR points. Maybe take a point off that as a floor, knowing that the ceiling is still in that 20 PPR point range.
What'd you get, Adam?
Yeah, well, I left the room briefly to get a drink because it is so freaking hot. And I was like losing it a little bit. So I needed water. But I opened the fridge. I have a hard time opening the fridge and not eating something. So I ate this. They're supposed to be sort of energy. It's like an energy ball. It's oatmeal, peanut butter, honey, flaxseed. I don't know. It was okay.
Flaxseed.
Flaxseed is a great thing to throw in. It has very little taste unless you put a ton in, and it's super healthy. So you can just throw it into things, especially if you have kids, you want them to eat healthy, or just throw some flax.
Awesome. I'm going to put it in my next hot fudge sundae.
Exactly. Yeah, I know you're having this argument, but you mentioned it. I didn't hear everything you said. I'm sorry, because I was getting water and an energy.
Yeah, you knew I would talk a long time. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. But you mentioned that Achane was a lot better with Tua. I mean, he was close to 22, 23 points per game with Tua.
Five PPR points per game better with Tua.
So that's much better than what Nabers and Nacua did. So, Jamie, you don't even have Achane ranked in the first round, or you 13th. So how does that factor in what we saw with Tua and what we saw without Tua?
I mean, like he's awesome, and I do think like you look at the last 2 years of this offense, and 2 years ago they produced the touchdown leader from the running back position with Raheem Mostert. And last year, what Achane did when Tua was healthy was in the same range of Saquon, Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. And so it's hard to overlook that clearly. So the question for me is the offensive line, because we know it's going through another change, and how will that perform? the quarterback situation, will Tua stay healthy? And I do think, look, that, whatever you think of Zach Wilson, I'm hoping it's better than what they had last year, just in terms of backup production. So maybe that keeps, Achane from a 5-point difference to maybe a 3-point difference or a 2-point difference, or the same, in terms of the production in the games that Tua may miss. Dave hit the nail on the head in terms of the offense. Hopefully they do get a little bit more downfield, but I don't know if that's necessarily a negative for Achane. It clearly will impact his receptions, but maybe leads to more scoring opportunities that helped Mostert the year before when he had 18 rushing touchdowns. I'm just curious what they're going to do to supplement Achane, because the backups now are really interesting. Not exciting, but they're interesting, just to see what they're going to do, because Jalen Wright's an explosive player, didn't do anything in his rookie campaign. We know that Alexander Madison has had his moments and, can clearly come in and be a different sort of option from what Achane does. And then I think the wild card is, Ollie Gordon. And, if he can get back to his 2023 production when he was, really looking like a high-end draft pick and then struggled in 2024 collegiately, so all these things sort of are going to have to be sort of, for me, parsed out in training camp. But again, whether you like him 9th overall, 12th overall, 15th overall, I know his ADP on Fantasy Pros, I think, is, mid round 2, or early round 2, but he should go in the first 15 overall picks. He's got so much stud potential that if Tua plays 17 games, we could be looking at the RB1 here.
Right. I'm surprised he's not in the top 12 for you. He must be super high for someone if he's 13th for you and 9th. So this is Achane. He's 4th for Heath. Heath has him 4th overall. Dave has him 11th, and Jamie has Achane 13th. So do you both have Jeanty? No, Dave does not have Jeanty over him. Jamie does. All right, so let's have that discussion then. Jeanty versus Achane. Dave, you're taking Achane here. Jeanty, you have 13th.
Love the talent with Jeanty. I'm not really worried about Pete Carroll's comment about using multiple running backs. And, Mostert is not a reason to pass on Ashton Jeanty, but the overall offense in Las Vegas might be. The offensive line, we seem to be talking a lot about offensive lines today. And as a whole, I think they're more important than just one guy. I worry about that line being good for Jeanty. I was thrown off a little bit by how Jeanty played against some of the top college programs last year, and includes his last game against Penn State. He didn't have his best offensive line in front of him. It's a Boise State offensive line against Penn State with Abdul Carter. So it almost didn't seem fair, but there's going to be games this year where that Raiders offensive line is mismatched. And I'm wondering just how much work he'll really get. Is he going to be a candidate for 350 touches? Is he going to get, 17 touches? Is he going to average 17 PPR points per game when he's coming off of a heavy workload year at Boise State and he hasn't played NFL football yet? I don't want to draft him too close to the ceiling. And I was doing that earlier this offseason. And it was through one of those, lame loser nerdy exercises that I do where I went, why am I taking Ashton Jeanty over some of these established receivers that have awesome upside? And then I started weighing him against Achane and some other running backs, and I settled for putting him on the 1-2 turn. And that's where I think I'd be most comfortable taking Jeanty, who, again, super talented. He's going to get the ball a lot. It is a Chip Kelly offense. That's a good thing. But I'm just not sure he's going to deliver close enough to his ceiling to warrant a top 5 or even a top 10 pick.
So just to give you a peek behind the consensus rankings, it would have been great if Heath were on this show, because he has Achane 4th and he has Jeanty 5th. You guys have Achane and Jeanty 11th and 13th. For Dave, it's Achane 11th and Jeanty 13th. For Jamie, it's the opposite. It's Jeanty 11th and Achane 13th. I just did a Twitter poll here. Who's your favorite in PPR? And I did these 4 guys: Jeanty, Achane, Nico, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're the last 4 in our consensus rankings discussion for today. So we'll see what people have to say about that. Jamie, I'm going to get your thoughts on Jeanty versus Achane, Jeanty overall. And we're going to do that after this break on FFT. We'll be right back. Okay, take it away on Jeanty.
I think both guys in terms of Jeanty. To me, it's a 3-player debate because I think if you're going wide receiver, you're going wide receiver. I think it's Jeanty, Achane, and McCaffrey is the debate that a lot of people are going to have to decide on if you're going running back there. And to your point, Adam, if McCaffrey's healthy, he probably will be the choice. Jeanty's the shiny new toy, and Achane, I don't think people again realize how good he was in the Tua games and just the opportunity that he has in front of him. For me, I like Jeanty the best of that trio right now, simply because I think Dave said it. I don't think he's going to have a lot of competition for touches, despite what Pete Carroll said. Especially when you're looking at the guys he's competing with. I mean, Mostert is probably the best of the trio, and he's 32. When you're talking about a guy that couldn't finish the season last year, who's bounced around the league and had injury concerns almost everywhere he's been. Sincere McCormick and Zamir White, like these are just guys. Jeanty's such a star if he lives up to the billing, and superstar if he can play like he did collegiately. I think Chip Kelly being there is huge. I do think the offensive line is somewhat underrated, and I think it's definitely better than Miami's. And so I don't think this is a team that when they get behind is going to get away from leaning on him in whatever capacity that he's on the field. Now, again, Achane's going to be in the same conversation, and obviously McCaffrey is as well. So it's really a matter of, do you think Jeanty can be this, standout rookie, Saquon, Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott type of guy? Or is he going to be more along the lines of what, I don't want to even say running back, like Marvin Harrison, just another overhyped rookie that, we all thought was walking into a great situation and lets us down, despite the fact that his rookie numbers are probably decent, but just the overall fantasy production is terrible. And
how about Bijan as a rookie?
Bijan is, great call. These guys that have, a lot of hype and they just don't live up to it. So that certainly could be the case. So again, it's going to come down to, do you trust the opportunity of what Jeanty is getting? The team that he's on, all these things that sort of factor into it. And I trust the coach and the play caller. We know, how many times we said this in Pete Carroll's tenure? He wants to run the ball. He wants to run the ball. He wants to run the ball, and what did they do in his first draft? They went out and they got the best running back available. It sets up all too perfectly. Chip Kelly's history with running backs is great, and just, looking at what he did with the two guys that he had at Ohio State. Now you smush Judkins and Trevion Henderson together and you have Ashton Jeanty. And so, there's just, so much upside here for him that it's hard to overlook. Now, to Dave's point, as he said, you don't want to draft him at his ceiling. We don't really know what his ceiling is, given the fact of how good he could be. I think back into round 1 makes sense. So, whether he's, 10 plus, I think that's where he should come into play. I don't think you should be taking him in the first, 6 or 7 picks personally, but, when you're looking back end of round 1 and upside and, starting to, separate these players, you could go running back if you want to. I don't recommend it, but I mean, imagine if McCaffrey's right and Jeanty hits, like that's a huge start to your team if you take those two players, 12 and 13.
I think it needs to be said that if it's half PPR or non-PPR, Jeanty's easily a first-round pick. That's just common sense, obviously, because the catches don't count. So I wanted to just put that in there.
I mean, he's going 7th overall in Fantasy Pros. He's a first-round pick.
I think that there will be at least a couple of people in every single draft in August and September that will target him. That they'll know they don't have a top 5 pick, and they'll say, "Man, I just want to have some fun. This dude was awesome for 2 years in college. Now he's on the Raiders. Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, blah, blah, blah." They're not going to care about the offensive line. They're not going to care about distribution of the football to other people. They're just going to get Jeanty. They're not going to care what we have to say. And they're just going to get him. And so I would guess that 80, what'd you say his ADP is like 7? That's where he's going to end up going. Well, I don't like it. I wouldn't take him there, but that's where he's going to go.
I don't think that the PPR, half PPR thing should make a difference. Now, non-PPR, yes, absolutely. You want to focus on running backs, but I don't necessarily think you should be taking wide receivers ahead of these elite running backs in PPR, unless you're talking about a low catch running back, because if Jeanty is a 50 catch running back, I definitely think that's in the cards here for a great pass catching running back like him. He has the potential to be that. Then you're getting a bigger advantage at the running back position in full PPR than you are in even half PPR. You could argue that any running back who's going to catch 50 or more balls is more valuable in full PPR than half PPR. So I think full PPR might actually boost Jeanty's value. I don't know how much they're going to throw to him. We just had that report yesterday that Mostert would be the third down back. We'll see about that. Could start that way. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, he has a bigger edge. If he catches 50 passes, he has a bigger edge over other running backs than he does in full PPR than he does in half PPR. So, yeah.
Sure. But I don't think he's got that edge against the wide receivers that we're taking in round.
I mean, he's obviously not going to catch as many passes as a wide receiver, but I don't think that really has to be the deciding factor here. If you're in the first round, you're going, well, Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to catch 100-something passes and Jeanty's only going to catch 50. I don't think that means you have to take St. Brown over Jeanty.
10 touchdowns, Adam.
What do you mean? What's 10 touchdowns?
110 catches versus 50 catches in fantasy points. That's 60 fantasy points.
But we just heard from Heath yesterday. Running backs usually get more yards than wide receivers.
Of course they do, and they get more touchdowns in general as well.
Exactly. So
is Jeanty going to get enough of that compared to somebody like St. Brown to make up that difference? St. Brown has had double-digit touchdowns each of the last 2 years.
Well, St. Brown averaged 18.5 PPR fantasy points per game last year. And he did that with 115 catches in 17 games. If Jeanty catches 50, if Jeanty has 50 catches, I think he could average 18.5 PPR fantasy points.
Can Jeanty be 1,500 total yards, 10 touchdowns, and 50 catches?
Yeah.
I think that's low, the yardage, because you look at Achane with Tua was on pace for like 1,800 total yards. So I think Jeanty could definitely be in the 1,700 total yard category.
I was just using that as a baseline.
Yeah, no, 1,500 total yards in a full season is...
Well, it's 10 touchdowns and 50 catches at that position, though.
How many points per game is... All right, let's go 1,600 total yards. Okay, plus 50, plus 10 touchdowns is 60 divided by 17. That's 15.9 PPR fantasy points per game. So he's going to have to do better than that. He's going to have to get to probably 12 touchdowns and 1,700 total yards.
Okay. Or 60 catches.
170 plus 50 plus, what did I say, 12 touchdowns? Times 6 is 72, divided by 17. That's 17.2 PPR fantasy points. So you see, it's not easy for a running back to average 17 PPR fantasy points per game. 12 touchdowns, 50 catches, and 1,700 total yards, not even counting any fumbles, is 17.2 PPR fantasy points per game. It's a great season.
And Amon-Ra is coming off not even his best year, and he had 115 catches, 1,263 yards, and 12 touchdowns. I think the catches make a difference, Adam. I think that's kind of a big deal.
They are a big deal. Okay, so and let's transition to this Twitter poll I did here, because I said, who's your favorite in PPR? I got 149 votes.
I'd be shocked if it's not St. Brown.
It is St. Brown in a runaway.
Yeah.
So I did Jeanty, Achane, Nico, and St. Brown. St. Brown is the lowest in our consensus rankings. Is that Heath's fault? Heath has him 16th. You guys both have St. Brown 9th. So you obviously are higher on St. Brown than consensus, which is 12th. In our consensus rankings, it is Nabers 7, Puka 8, Achane 9, Jeanty 10, Nico 11, Amon-Ra St. Brown 12. And it's Heath is really influencing the rankings so much today. He's super high on Jeanty and Achane. He's pretty low on St. Brown, with St. Brown 16th overall. He has Nico Collins 14th overall. So it's just, this would have been the show for him to be on.
He's coming for Dave's moniker as the running back guy.
I guess so. All right. So St. Brown, he finished his wide receiver.
Keep up with your big words.
There you go. Moniker. There's a K in there, right? No C. It's just, is it Moniker?
You just have to look it up afterwards there, buddy.
Let's go. St. Brown, wide receiver 7 per game last year. Maybe not quite as good as you might remember him to have been. He was wide receiver 4 per game the year before. And the big difference would really be 1,500 yards in 2023, 1,263 yards in 2024. Yeah, so that's kind of a big deal. The yards per catch went way down. Okay. Anyway, why are you guys higher on St. Brown than consensus here?
He's tried and true. I mean, again, if you have legitimate concerns, and this is Heath's argument, you have legitimate concerns about the Lions having significant regression because last year everything went somewhat perfect for them. They lose their offense coordinator. They lose their center. And how much of a step back do they take offensively with an improved defense? Because that was a big part of the spike at the end of the season was they had to outscore people. They had to be in these shootouts. And again, you'd like to think all offenses perform at that level no matter what's happening on the other side of the ball, but they had no choice. So it does sort of lend itself to a lot of things taking a step back and a lot of players taking a step back. But he did that the year before. He was better. I think what you got from him last year is probably something that's replicable. Even if there is more for Jamison Williams and potentially more for Sam Laporta, I don't think that St. Brown's going to have a significant dip in production. So I said this last year, I wrote the whole magazine story on who's the best wide receiver in fantasy because we had the whole debate about Lamb versus Tyreek versus Chase versus Jefferson. Like there was so many different players and it kept coming back to the same thing. St. Brown's just the safest one. And I don't think anything really has changed. Maybe Puka's safer because of what he's now done 2 years in his first 2 years in the league. So, if you want to, put that, moniker on him as being the safer of the two receivers. I think in terms of St. Brown, like what he's built toward in the beginning part of his career to where he's at now, like he just feels like one of the safest picks in round one. And clearly he's coming off of knee surgery and he did miss a game last year, if I'm not mistaken. Had the wrist injury at least.
St. Brown, no, he
the year before then it was the wrist injury. He's just so good, so consistent, such a big part of one of the best offenses in football. I don't think Ben Johnson's departure is going to change that as long as Jared Goff is healthy. So I don't know. You get to the back end of round one, like he just feels like an easy auto select when he comes on the draft board.
I'm cool taking him in the middle part of round one.
Yeah.
Just to have that safe type of player locked into your team. With Nabers, there's a little bit of downside. What if Russell Wilson regresses and Jackson Dart totally botches it? And now Malik is back to where he was last year, and maybe he doesn't average as many fantasy points per game. Nacua, what if he scores only 4 total touchdowns again this year? I have a tough time believing that St. Brown's going to score double-digit touchdowns. But I also have a hard time believing that this version of the Lions offense is going to get so exotic with John Morton that they're going to get away, that the targets per game will take another step back with St. Brown. He lost 2 targets per game year over year. He had 10.3 targets per game in 2023. It went down to 8.3. What did that do for his fantasy numbers? His touchdowns went up. His fantasy points per game went down by 2 PPR points per game. And I don't think that there's another step down from there. So I agree with you, Jamie. What he did last year is totally replicable. And when John Morton's feeling the heat in the second half of games, when the Lions are tied or down 7, he's calling plays for St. Brown. That dude's going to get a lot of work. And he also gets a ton of red zone targets. Okay, Nacua, Nabers, those guys averaged 1 red zone target per game. St. Brown averaged nearly 2. He had a hammerlock on that on the Lions. I don't think that's changing either. Safe pick in round 1.
Kind of like your James Cook argument, Adam. Like
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
You want the top receiver on this passing offense, top pass catcher on this passing offense. You want the top running back on the Bills offense.
Yeah, I do think we're calling him the safest of among who? He's not.
I think he might be the safest player of everybody we've talked about on this show today.
Okay, Nabers, Nacua, Achane, Jeanty, Nico, St. Brown.
Yeah,
saying St. Brown's the safest of that group. I mean,
really, like once you start to get past Chase, like he's probably the safest.
What about just the fact that he had 142 targets in 17 games? Because that's the lowest.
Over 8 targets per game. You still love to see that. That's why he's not going, ahead of Jefferson or Lamb.
But it's not as good as Nabers or Nacua or Nico. Based on when Nico was healthy.
Yeah, I mean the
but he had a higher catch rate.
The upside for some of those guys is probably better.
Right. So he did have a higher catch rate than Nico Collins, but in terms of yards per catch, yards per target, Nico is as good as it gets. Nico, let's talk about him right now because that's what we love about Nico Collins, his efficiency. Nico Collins, I think there's a very easy comp for Nico Collins. To me, it's A.J. Brown in terms of what kind of player they are. They are big, physical, outside receivers. They are so good. And in terms of yards per route run, yards per target, yards per catch, Nico Collins and A.J. Brown are the creme de la creme, basically. I mean, they are among the very, very best in the NFL. For Nico, it's been 2 years in a row. For A.J. Brown, it's been his entire career. Nico, you might say, will probably get more targets than A.J. Brown. I think that would be the guess, although I would look at the recent history with A.J. Brown before this past year. He was a 150 target guy 2 years in a row, basically, close to that. But yeah, I mean, this is the difference between Nico and St. Brown. Nico is going to do more with his targets, probably. I don't know if you guys disagree with that. You feel free. But not more with yards. Catches, no. Yards, he should be better on a per target basis. Touchdowns, maybe we'll call that a toss-up. So is there an argument to be made that in a half PPR league, you should take Nico ahead of St. Brown?
Yeah.
In half PPR?
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a case in full PPR.
I would take him over St. Brown.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me is who I keep flopping in my rankings of Nico and St. Brown, because I do think that there's more upside with Nico because of everything that we've discussed with the Lions and some of the potential pitfalls. I do think that there's a higher floor for St. Brown. Look, you got a quarterback in Houston that's, maybe dealing with a shoulder injury. We don't know how potentially impactful it could be. Seems like it's nothing, but, not ideal that he's dealing with it in the offseason. He took a step back last year. The offensive line, if you're going to, nitpick Frank Ragnow leaving, I mean, my God, they got rid of Laramie Tunsil and you're overhauling that entire group almost. So another coordinator change for them, so, right. And
yes, the Texans. Yeah.
Right. So there's, and then new running mates coming in, so Christian Kirk and Higgins body of work over the season, maybe better than what Tank Dell, the 6 games of Stephon Diggs and everything else that sort of had to go into play there with the Texans receiving core as the year went on. So, I mean, look, he may completely dominate targets. He may lose more than we thought because these other guys are bigger pieces of the puzzle and guys that Stroud may rely on a little bit more. So I don't really have a lot of concerns, but there are some for Nico comparatively to what St. Brown is dealing with here.
The first 4 games of the season, Diggs played all 4. Tank Dell played 3 of them. Nico Collins averaged 22.7 PPR fantasy points per game. He was unbelievable. He had 8, 10, 10, and 15 targets. The 15 target game came without Tank Dell. Then he hurt his hamstring. 2 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown on 2 targets against the Bills. Hurt his hamstring. I am
of the first quarter, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I am of the belief that he was not the same player when he came back from the hamstring injury.
I would agree with you.
The stats, the advanced stats, it just was not the Nico Collins we were used to seeing. And he still was solid, but he wasn't great. But when he's been healthy the last couple of years on a per route basis, all that stuff, he's as good as anyone. And I'm fired up for him because I think and I like, you talk about Malik Nabers getting a quarterback upgrade. Sometimes when you see wide receivers have a big season, it's because their quarterback, even if it's the same guy, bounces back. So CJ Stroud, you've talked about it, Jamie. CJ Stroud was pretty good the first 4 games. He struggled. Yeah, right. I only had him in the first 4 games. He was very good, on pace for almost 4,500 yards, 26 touchdowns. He could bounce back. He was so good as a rookie. What if he just has a better year? That I think could elevate Nico as well.
It certainly could happen. I mean, again, you're looking at a very talented guy that should, despite what I said about Kirk and Higgins, he should dominate targets, and that's the allure here of what he could be, this elite talent that we talked about the first couple of years of his career. And then he gets CJ Stroud in a coaching change and bam, he became this, stud that we're talking about for the last couple of seasons and now talking about as a borderline first round pick. So he's the one that's probably going to get pushed out of the first round, if I had to guess, of the players that we've talked about because of whether it's McCaffrey or Achane or Jeanty or, St. Brown, the guys that are at the, back tier of our consensus rankings. It's just, you could be getting a top 3 wide receiver. He's got that much upside, so he could be better than, think about all the things we're saying about Nabers. And I know Nabers, like you said, Adam, could be the best receiver in football right now, just based on some of the expectations for him. Like Nico's situation could be better by far.
All of these guys are that good, right? They're so good.
Sure. And could you picture Nico Collins bottoming out and being like 19th or 20th among wide receivers in PPR?
No way. None of them.
Right.
Though.
So here's another wide receiver. This is why he's in the top tier.
Yeah.
Who's got a high floor and a high ceiling. I don't think he's got the same type of ceiling as the other receivers we've talked about, but I think he's real close. And he was real close last year, just in PPR points per game.
Let me read this comment here from Corey. Nico is way too high. 80-something catches, and he's top 12 in PPR. If he gets 84 catches, he better get 13 or more touchdowns. So he played 18% or fewer of the snaps in both week 5 and week 18. I don't think you should fight me on removing those games. 18% of the fewer of the snaps is not, that you get rid of those games. His pace in the other 10 games that he played, Nico Collins, can you hear this lawnmower right next to my room, by the way? I'm sorry. Okay. Nico Collins was on pace for 104 catches, 1,513 yards, and 9 touchdowns on 156 targets, and that was playing most of that time after the hamstring injury.
So a little bit of context there is necessary. About half the season, Stephon Diggs was there, and Tank Dell was on and off the field along the way. This just goes right to Jamie's point. If we're taking Diggs and Dell out of the Texans and we're replacing them with Christian Kirk and the 2 Cyclone rookies, how does this guy not get at least a 25% target share?
Oh, yeah.
There were games last year. I looked this up today. When Diggs and Tank Dell were not on the field, this can include parts of games where they were healthy, just not on the field. Nico Collins had a 36.4 target per route run rate.
Oh,
it's ridiculous. No one's going to get that.
You know who's better than that?
Who is better than that?
Puka Nacua, baby.
Without Cup?
No, all season.
What was the target per route run rate?
I think it was 39%, or maybe that was the last.
That seems
38.3% target per route run rate. Pick your jaw up off the floor.
Yeah, there it is. 38.3.
Yeah, that
wasn't even top 10.
Yes, it was.
Among all players in the
among
NFL?
wide receivers with 50 or more routes, it was number 1.
Yes, it was.
Come on, son. All right, we got to go. Someone mentioned in the chat that flaxseed is lowers your testosterone. I think this is fake news. I think this is fake, but I was actually hoping it was real. I was hoping it was true because then I would have an excuse for my softball performance, but I don't. So
it's considered temporary and can potentially be reversed.
It's hard to factor that in because you shaved right before the show.
Okay, so last week I told you I lined a ball up the middle, and the runner at first base got kind of a bad read and got thrown out at second. You gave me a fielder's choice for this instead of a hit, which was, I thought, a little harsh. Yesterday,
I gave you a fielder's choice instead of him?
A hit instead of a hit.
Oh, instead of a hit.
Yeah. Yesterday, I hit the ball off the end of the bat. I popped it up in between second base and center field. Second baseman's going back, gets off the tip of his glove and falls in. Give me a single or an error?
Single.
Yeah. All right. I'll take it.
So I always think, first off, we used to work with a guy who used to do the scoring for the Marlins games.
Really?
The mayor.
Yeah. It works. And he had that official score for the Marlins. Like no joke. Like not just go there with his book for fun in the stands. Like he was the guy in the scorer's booth. Like everything came down to him, hit or error. So like we had some coworkers, our buddy Eric Mack used to always say, hey, what'd you give him there? So he would ask him the next day why he scored something the way he did. I'm always, because I do some scoring for my kids' teams. Like you always want to make your team feel better, right? So I hope they didn't give you an error on that.
I mean, no one's keeping track.
I feel like the error has to be obvious in order to score it an error.
So I had 2 things with my own son in our little run that we're on here. One, there was a line drive over the shortstop head. It's very similar. Kid jumped, full extension, ball tipped off his glove. The guy who's scoring for us gave an error. I was like, that's a little tough.
An error?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know where his perspective was on the Eric on the play.
Yeah, all right.
And then the previous tournament, you're talking about how hot it is. The umpire, the home plate umpire, all the gear, little heavy set, older guy, had to leave the game. We had to call the paramedics. It was a little scary.
Oh man.
So the other umpire just started calling so we can keep things moving, called the game from behind the mound. And there was, so second and third, I'm coaching third. My son hits a line drive into center field. Kid comes running in, looks like he makes a diving catch. I'm more worried about the kid at third base tagging up. Everybody's screaming at me. He dropped it. Umpire calls him out. Afterwards, the umpire walks over to me and goes, did you think he caught it? Just trying to be honest. And I said, I really couldn't tell. It looked like he made the catch. I was more worried about the kid tagging up. My son was so pissed at me that I didn't challenge it. Cost him a hit. He's looking at stats. But went back and looked at the video, and yes, he did drop it. So scorers are not going to get everything right, unfortunately.
No. I have big feelings about official scoring. First of all, the whole idea that you can't assume a double play. You can assume so many things in baseball when you're doing scoring, but for some reason you can't assume a double play. That is preposterous. And then the whole, high fly ball to center field. He loses it in the sun and it drops, and they score that a hit. There's this rule of thumb that if the ball doesn't hit the player's glove, then it has to be a hit. That's clearly an error. I don't know why baseball has these stupid traditions. We know they're so dumb.
They don't touch it, yeah.
I mean, come on, you can't give a hit. That's not on the pitcher.
We kind of have this rule of thumb, like when we're scoring our own team hitting, would our fielders make that play?
I mean, it's different for Little League because I don't know the standards, but in Major League Baseball, a high fly ball that just drops because someone loses it in the sun or miscommunication, and that gets scored a hit, when obviously that should not affect the pitcher negatively. Also, I ranted and raved about this when I was hosting the Fantasy Baseball podcast. We have ERA, right? Because if you give up an unearned run, it shouldn't affect your ERA. Why don't we have E-WHIP? Why should right? Why should a player get on base but via an error affect your WHIP? You right?
Yeah.
Not a bad point. All right. For more, follow me on Twitter now. All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow with players 13 through 18, whoever they may be in the consensus rankings on FFT. See you later, everybody.